After losing her job and home, Mara Jennings spends her last $600 on an old broken houseboat tied along the Mississippi. People say it's cursed, but she has nowhere else to go. When she finds a locked chest and a book with strange names inside, she realizes the boat might hold more than just her hope. It might hold a secret the river wants to keep. The van's engine coughed one last time before falling silent. Mara let it, pressing her forehead against the steering wheel and listening to the sound of the river beyond the docks. Slow, thick, indifferent. Eli slept in the back seat beneath a quilt that still smelled faintly of their old home, now gone like everything else that had been steady in her life. Outside, the dawn mist rolled low over the Mississippi. Gulls cried somewhere over the water, and the faint clang of a buoy bell came drifting in, the kind of sound that feels eternal. Mara stepped out, stretching her stiff legs. The air carried a trace of diesel and mud, the scent of a working river. Somewhere in that mess of fog and wooden piers, life went on. Boats moved, people shouted, and the world didn't seem to notice that she and her boy were down to their last few dollars in dreams. She zipped up her jacket, watching Eli through the van's window. He stirred, his hand curling around the small stuffed turtle he never slept without. For a moment she felt something twist in her chest, that old mixture of love and guilt that motherhood never let her escape. At the harbor office, the doorbell chimed weakly as she entered. Mrs. Tilda looked up from her newspaper. The woman's hair was a halo of gray frizz, her face lined like an old map. "You're early," she muttered, sliding her glasses down. "We don't rent slips till after 8. "I'm not here for a slip," Mara said softly. "Just looking." Tilda raised an eyebrow. "At what?" Mara pointed toward the listing board pinned behind the counter. Faded Polaroids of boats for sale, most looking barely seaworthy. Among them, one picture caught her eye, a small, sagging houseboat, half-sunk and peeling white paint, tied to Dock 7. $600, as is, cash only. Tilda followed her gaze and sighed. "That thing again? Lord, child, you don't want that boat." Mara hesitated. "Why not?" The woman leaned back. "Because no one ever does. Every year someone buys it. Every year it finds its way back. Folks say it's cursed." Mara almost laughed, but it came out tired instead. Cursed sounds cheaper than rent. That earned her a small smirk. "You got a stubborn streak. Fine. It's yours if you got the money. But don't say I didn't warn you." Mara handed over her last 600 in trembling bills. Her fingers brushed the edge of the counter, the same way a diver might touch the railing before jumping. Dock 7 creaked under her boots. The planks were warped, black with river slime. The houseboat floated crookedly, its reflection broken by ripples of muddy water. Paint peeled from its siding like old skin. The name on the hull was barely legible. Maribel. Eli ran ahead, his excitement cutting through the chill morning. "Mom, it's like a little house." "Yeah," she said, forcing a smile. "A little house that needs a lot of love." Ray, the dock hand, appeared from behind a stack of crates, wiping his hands on a rag. "You the one bought the Maribel?" "That's me." He shook his head, half amused, half sorry. "Place leaks like a sieve. Floorboards soft. Watch your step inside. Folks say she used to be a gambler's boat back in the 60s. Bad things happened here. Bad things happen everywhere," Mara murmured. He shrugged and helped her unfasten the ropes. The boat rocked, groaning as if waking from a long sleep. Inside, the air was thick and stale. The floor moaned under her weight. Dust floated in narrow shafts of light that pushed through cracked windows. Eli darted around, his laughter echoing off the walls. "Mom, there's a kitchen!" "And a bunk." Mara's throat tightened. "Don't touch anything sharp, okay?" She traced her hand across the counter. Swollen wood, old burn marks, and the faint outline of a ring where a glass had once been set down. It was a ghost of a home, but it could be theirs. A gust of wind pushed through the open doorway, carrying the scent of the river inside. Something shifted. A door at the back of the cabin creaked open by itself. Mara froze. The sound wasn't loud, but it felt deliberate, like the boat was breathing her in. She took a step forward, peering into the narrow hallway. A single door waited there, paint-blistered brass knob green with age. "Ray," she called, but he'd already gone. Only the water answered, slapping against the hull below. She turned the knob. The hinges screamed as the door opened. Inside was a small room, darker than the rest, almost perfectly untouched. A cot, a broken lantern, and a wooden chest pushed up against the wall. The chest was locked. Eli's voice broke the silence. "Can we sleep here tonight, Mom?" Mara looked at the boy, his hopeful face smudged with dust and sunlight. "Maybe," she whispered, "if it holds us." But her gaze stayed on the chest. Its lock rusted, its edges sealed tight with time. She reached out to touch it, feeling the cool metal under her fingertips. Something about it felt wrong. Not dangerous exactly, just waiting. Behind her, the river murmured against the hull, like a voice just beneath hearing. Mara stepped back, brushing dust from her jeans. "We'll clean up later." she said quietly, more to herself than to Eli. "Let's get some air." She led him outside, but as she locked the cabin door behind them, she thought she heard it again, that soft creak from the dark room below, as if the boat itself was whispering, and though she tried to shake it off, one thought wouldn't leave her mind. Maybe Mrs. Tilda was right. The morning after their first night on the Maribel came with a heavy fog that blurred the line between water and sky. Mara woke to the soft lap of the river against the hull and the faint ticking of Eli's toy watch, a sound she hadn't noticed until now, steady and small, like time itself refusing to stop for anyone. The thin mattress beneath her back was cold and damp. Every surface in the cabin carried the river's breath, a thin sheen of moisture clinging to the glass, the walls, even the few boxes she'd managed to carry in from the van. She sat up, rubbing her arms, and for a moment the fog outside seemed to seep right through the windows. Curling around her ankles, Eli was still asleep in the narrow bunk by the window, curled beneath a blanket that barely covered him. His mouth twitched in a dream, the kind of dream she hoped was still soft, still innocent. Mara slipped on her jacket and stepped outside. The dock was silent except for a single gull perched on a piling, its head cocked, watching her. Beyond the mist, the town looked washed out and half forgotten. A gas station, a diner, a few scattered houses whose roofs glinted faintly when the sun tried to break through. The river, on the other hand, looked alive, always moving, always hiding. Ray appeared an hour later, balancing a crate of old tools and 2 chipped enamel mugs. "Brought you coffee," he said, setting one down on the railing. "Figured you'd need it if you're planning to tackle this wreck." Mara smiled faintly. "Wreck's a generous word. It's a miracle she's still floating." He looked around the deck, testing a few boards with his boot. "You might want to check the bilge before long. If water's getting in faster than it's leaving, you'll have more than ghosts to worry about." "Ghosts I can handle," she muttered. He gave her a look. "You shouldn't joke about that around here." When he left, Mara found herself staring at the river again, her reflection rippling, fractured, shifting. By noon, she'd thrown open every window and started cleaning. Eli helped for a while, humming to himself as he gathered bits of broken glass and scraps of old newspaper. The papers were from 1971, headlines about the river floods and a casino barge that sank upriver taking 3 men with it. When she turned around, Eli was gone. "Eli?" His voice came faintly from the back room. That room. "Mom, look." She hurried down the narrow hall, the boards creaking under her feet. He was kneeling beside the locked chest, fingers tracing the rusted latch. "It moved," he said. "The lid." "I heard it." Mara knelt, placing a hand on his shoulder. "It's just old, honey. Metal expands, wood shifts, that's all." But as she said it, she realized she'd heard it too. That low click, almost like breath drawn through teeth. She gripped the lock and tugged. It didn't budge. "Come on," she said gently. "Let's finish cleaning the kitchen." Eli frowned but obeyed. Still, as they left, she could feel the air change behind her, the kind of silence that waits for someone to look back. That night, they lit the small propane stove and heated canned soup. The smell of tomato filled the cabin, mingling with the damp wood. It felt almost like home, until the hull groaned beneath them. "Wind?" Eli asked. "Yeah," Mara said quickly, though the air was still. Later, after Eli fell asleep, she sat by the window and stared at the water, the reflection of the moon sliding through it like a blade. Her eyes drifted to the shadowy outline of the chest through the open doorway. Her hand twitched. She thought of the $600 she'd spent, the dwindling bills in her wallet, the job applications unanswered. Maybe there was something in that chest. Old tools, valuables, something she could sell. People left strange things behind on riverboats. She stood, the floor sighing under her steps. The chest looked different at night, darker, smaller, almost pulsing with the reflection of the water moving outside. She knelt, ran her fingers along the edge again, and this time noticed something she hadn't before, a small engraving under the latch. 3 letters, faint but visible under the rust, RJH. She didn't recognize them. She fetched a screwdriver from Ray's toolbox and pressed it against the lock. It resisted at first, then gave a dry metallic crack. The lid lifted with a hiss of stale air. Inside was nothing she expected. Bundles of newspapers, each tied with brittle string, their ink half faded. A few empty glass bottles, and one thing wrapped in oilcloth. Her hands shook as she unwrapped it. It was a small ledger, leather-bound, warped from moisture. The cover read, Maribel Accounts 1969. She flipped it open. Columns of names, numbers, and amounts written in elegant cursive. Some pages were stained dark. Not ink, not water. Something else. A few entries were circled. Tilda Harrow, $2,000. Ray Henson, $500. Her breath caught. Tilda. Ray. Her mind scrambled for logic. Maybe coincidences. Common names. But deep down, She knew the river didn't deal in coincidences. A sudden thud echoed through the hull, sharp, low, like something heavy dropped in the water below. She froze, every sense wide open. Another sound, softer this time, the creak of a rope tightening, then the faint rhythmic tapping against the side of the boat. She edged toward the door and looked out through the cracked window. Nothing but fog, yet she could swear she saw something, a shape just under the water, swaying with the current, round, dark, almost human. Her throat tightened, then a voice, faint but clear, drifted through the mist. A man's voice, slurred with distance. "You shouldn't have opened it." Mara spun, heart hammering. "Who's there?" Only silence answered. Then Eli's sleepy voice behind her, small and trembling. "Mom? Who are you talking to?" She turned, forcing her voice steady. "No one, baby. Go back to bed." He hesitated, then shuffled away, his bare feet whispering on the wood. Mara stood alone in the half-light, watching the fog curl against the windows, the sound of the water pulsing like breath. She picked up the ledger again. The last page was blank, except for a single handwritten note. "The river keeps what it's owed." The ink looked fresh. Mara shut the book, pressing it to her chest. The room felt smaller now, the air heavier. She sat down on the bunk, staring at the door to the back room, the faint creak of the hull like a heartbeat beneath her. For the first time since buying the Maribel, she realized something she hadn't wanted to admit. The boat wasn't abandoned. It was waiting. By sunrise, the fog had thinned, but the unease hadn't. Mara hadn't slept. The ledger lay on the small kitchen table, open to that final line. "The river keeps what it's owed." She'd read it so many times that the words had begun to lose meaning, turning into something rhythmic, hypnotic, like the river's pulse outside. She brewed the last of the instant coffee and stared at the surface of the cup. Her reflection trembled with every ripple. Eli stirred in the next room, murmuring in his sleep. He'd cried in the night, a soft, muffled sound that tore through her like splinters. When she'd asked what was wrong, he said he dreamt someone knocking on the hull, asking to come in. Now, as the morning light seeped through the cracked windows, Mara told herself it was just the wind or the tide. Kids' dreams twist the ordinary into monsters. That's all it was. Still, she couldn't stop glancing at the doorway to the back room. That ledger shouldn't exist. And those names, Tilda Harrow, Ray Henson, they weren't just coincidences. She knew the look in Mrs. Tilda's eyes yesterday when she'd mentioned the boat, that flicker of recognition disguised as irritation, and Ray's tone when he'd said, "Bad things happened here." Maybe he wasn't warning her. Maybe he was confessing. By 8 o'clock, Mara made up her mind. She'd ask them both. The harbor was waking up when she arrived. Diesel engines rumbled somewhere upriver, gulls squabbled over scraps, and fishermen called out greetings that sounded more like warnings. Mrs. Tilda sat behind the cracked glass of the harbor office, cigarette smoke curling in lazy rings above her head. She looked up as Mara entered. "Well, you're still afloat," she said, exhaling smoke. "Guess the curse missed you." Mara forced a smile. "Funny thing about curses. Sometimes they come with paperwork." Tilda blinked. "Paperwork?" Mara dropped the ledger on the counter. The sound was heavier than it should have been, echoing faintly against the glass walls. Tilda froze. The hand holding her cigarette trembled slightly. "Where'd you get that?" Inside the Maribel. Tilda's jaw tightened. She stubbed out the cigarette and stared at the book like it was a snake. "You should have left it where it was. It had your name in it," Mara said quietly. $2,000. Raised too. Doesn't mean anything. Tilda snapped too fast. "It means something to me. You sold me that boat without a word about this. What is it?" Tilda's eyes flickered toward the window, scanning the docks as if to make sure no one was listening. That boat should have gone down with the rest of them. The rest of who? But the older woman didn't answer. Instead, she leaned forward, her voice lowering to a gravelly whisper. "You're a mother, aren't you? You know what it's like to do what you have to do. Some debts, they don't drown easy." Before Mara could ask more, the bell above the door jingled. Ray stepped in, hat pulled low, smelling faintly of oil and river water. His eyes landed on the ledger immediately. "So you found it," he said flatly. Mara looked between them. "You both knew?" Ray exhaled slowly. "Everyone around here knows, or pretends not to. Easier that way." Tilda stood, her voice shaking slightly. "Don't you start, Ray. You got your cut, same as me." "Cut of what?" Mara demanded. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Finally, Ray rubbed a hand over his face. "There was money on that boat. Cash from the gambling run in '69. Owner tried to smuggle it upriver when the feds came down. Didn't make it. Boat drifted loose after the flood. Bodies went missing. Folks found the Maribel weeks later, half sunk but still chained. The money was gone. So were the men. And you?" Tilda's laugh was bitter. "We were kids. Found the boat before the sheriff did. Thought we'd hit salvation. Took what we could carry, hid the rest. But that river?" She looked out the window, her eyes wet but hard. "You can't steal from something that already owns you." Mara felt her stomach twist. You think the boat's haunted? No. Ray's voice was calm, almost tired. Just cursed by memory. That's worse. He reached for the ledger, but Mara pulled it back. I'm not giving it to you. Then you best burn it, Tilda said sharply. Before it burns you. Mara hesitated, clutching the book against her chest. Ray's gaze softened. You seem like a good woman. Don't go digging into ghosts that paid their dues. But the question was already alive in her, like an ember she couldn't put out. What if the money's still there? Back on the Maribel, the river had changed color. Deeper, greener, as if swallowing sunlight whole. Eli was sitting on the deck, drawing in a notebook. His small fingers were smudged with graphite. What are you making, sweetheart? He smiled. A map of the boat. Mara knelt beside him. He'd sketched the layout in surprising detail. Every room, even the back hall, drawn from memory. But in the bottom corner, he'd added something else. What's that? She asked, pointing to a rectangle below the deck line. He shrugged. The room under the floor. I heard it last night. Her pulse quickened. You heard it? Eli nodded, eyes wide and serious. Someone walking. Slow. Like this. He mimed footsteps with his fingers. There's no room under the floor, baby. He looked up at her, confused. Then why's it knocking? Mara forced a smile she didn't feel. Probably the current hitting the hull. But after he went inside, she knelt down where he'd pointed. The boards there were different, thicker, newer than the rest. She tapped one. It sounded hollow. Her heart stuttered. Ray's warning echoed in her mind. Don't go digging into ghosts. But she'd lived too long letting fear make her small. She fetched a crowbar from the toolbox and wedged it under the edge. The first plank lifted with a groan that sent chills up her spine. Beneath it was darkness, a narrow cavity filled with damp air and the faint scent of oil. She reached for her flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom, glinting off metal. A safe, old, rusted, half buried in the silted floor. Her breath caught. She knelt closer, brushing away mud from the dial. The combination lock was corroded but intact. For a long time she just stared at it, feeling the weight of every choice that had led her here. Every corner turned, every desperate compromise. If this safe held what she suspected, it could change everything. She could give Eli a home again, a real one. Her hands trembled as she tried the handle. Locked. She tried again, harder. Nothing. Then, from somewhere deep inside the hull, came a thud. She froze. Another one. Louder. Closer. The flashlight flickered. Something moved beneath the floor. A sluggish shift, like mud settling, or something turning over. The air grew heavy, damp with the smell of iron. Her throat tightened. Eli? She called, stepping back. No answer. She climbed up to the deck. The fog had returned, rolling thick, swallowing the banks from view. Eli. The boy appeared from the cabin, rubbing his eyes. I was just inside, Mom. What's wrong? She exhaled shakily. Nothing. Nothing's wrong. But as she pulled him close, her eyes drifted to the water beside the boat. Something dark was floating there, caught in the reeds. A canvas bag, torn open at one corner. Bills fluttered out, wet and colorless. Mara stared, heart pounding. Then slowly the current carried it away, downriver, toward the wide bends where the morning sun dissolved into haze. When she looked down at her hands, she realized they were shaking. Maybe the river really did keep what it was owed, and maybe, just maybe, it was coming to collect. The storm came without warning. By late afternoon, clouds rolled in low and bruised, smothering the last of the sun. The wind bent the reeds flat against the riverbank, and the Maribel rocked gently at first, then harder, the ropes groaning against their moorings like something alive. Mara stood on deck, rain dripping from her hair into her eyes. The air smelled of wet iron and old secrets. Down in the cabin, Eli was coloring by the lantern light, his small voice humming a tune that used to calm her, until she realized it was the same rhythm as the river's knock against the hull. She turned toward the back room, where the floorboards now gaped open, the safe still half buried in the mud below. She hadn't touched it since yesterday, not after the fog, not after that bag of money drifted past, as if the river itself had coughed up a warning. But the thought of what might still be inside, what it could mean for Eli, pressed at her mind like hunger. When thunder cracked overhead, she flinched, clutching the railing. Across the water, she saw movement, a figure hurrying along the dock, coat flapping in the wind. Ray. He arrived soaked to the bone, hat pulled low, eyes darker than the storm. You shouldn't be out here, Mara said, voice barely carrying over the wind. Neither should you. He stepped aboard, the planks creaking under his boots. His gaze swept the deck, then met hers. You found the safe, didn't you? Mara didn't answer. I told you to leave it, he said, jaw tightening. That thing's more trouble than you can afford. She folded her arms. Trouble doesn't scare me anymore. Ray gave a bitter laugh. No, but debt does. That's what that box is. A debt. She looked past him at the storm-churned water. Debt to who? The dead? To the living who made it that way. he said quietly. For a moment, the wind filled the silence between them, carrying the sharp scent of riverweed and gasoline. Tell me the truth, she said. You and Tilda, you knew about it. You took the money. Ray's eyes softened, tired. We were 17, hungry. The town was drowning. The river took houses, jobs, people. That boat drifted in like a miracle. We thought God himself had sent it. He stepped closer. You ever been that desperate, Mara? So broke you'd take anything the water gave you? She said nothing. The truth sat heavy in her chest. Ray continued, voice low. We took what we could, buried most of it down there before the law came sniffing. But the night after, one of the boys that helped us never came home. The river rose, and we figured it claimed him too. He turned toward the hatch, staring at the darkness below. I've heard him since then. When it rains, that knocking, always from under the floor. Mara's stomach twisted. You think he's down there? Ray didn't look at her. I think what we bury never stays buried. Thunder rolled again, closer this time. The rain thickened, pounding against the roof like fists. Ray started toward the hatch. I'm locking that safe back up before something worse happens. Mara stepped in front of him. No, whatever's inside, it's mine now. I bought this boat. He shook his head. You bought a curse. Their eyes locked. The storm howled through the cracks of the cabin, rattling the lantern. For a second, Mara thought she saw movement beyond Ray. A shadow in the reflection of the window, bending with the sway of the boat. Then the light flickered, and it was gone. Get out, she said. Ray hesitated. Mara, get off my boat. He stared at her a long moment, then turned, boots thudding across the wet deck. You don't understand what that river wants, he said over his shoulder. It don't take payment in cash. The door slammed behind him, swallowed by the thunder. When the sound of his footsteps faded, Mara turned back to the safe. It sat there in the half-light like an accusation. Mute, rusted, patient, Eli appeared in the doorway, clutching his blanket. Mom, why was Ray angry? She forced a smile. He's just scared of the storm. Eli looked past her toward the hatch. It's knocking again. Mara froze. Tap, tap, tap. The sound came slow and deliberate from under the floor, steady, like someone calling to be let in. Eli's eyes widened. Mom? Go back to bed, she whispered. But, now Eli. He obeyed reluctantly, climbing into his bunk. Mara stood in the narrow hall, the river's sound pressing in from every side. The air felt charged, humming with the storm's energy. She picked up the lantern and lowered herself toward the open floor. The light trembled across the safe. The knocking had stopped. She reached for the dial, fingers slick with sweat. It wouldn't turn, stuck fast from years of rust. She gritted her teeth, forcing it until something inside gave with a soft click. Her breath caught. The door creaked open, revealing darkness. And then, beneath a layer of mud and mold, bundles of bills bound in waxed paper. Dozens of them. Her knees went weak. There it was. Salvation. Enough to buy a house, maybe more. Enough to never sleep in a van again. She reached in and pulled one bundle free. The bills crumbled slightly, but most were intact. 50s, hundreds, old, but real. Then she saw something else wedged in the corner. A human hand. She jerked back, heart slamming in her chest. The skin was gray, bloated, fingers curled as if reaching toward the surface. The air rushed out of her lungs. The lantern flickered, then went out. Darkness swallowed her. She crawled backward, hitting the wall. The boat rocked violently, the sound of the storm outside merging with something deeper. A groan from the hull that sounded almost like a voice. The floor thudded once, hard enough to rattle the dishes in the kitchen. Eli screamed from the other room. Mom! She scrambled up, running to him. He was sitting upright, eyes wide with terror, pointing toward the window. There's someone outside. Mara turned and saw a figure on the dock, barely visible through the sheets of rain. A man unmoving, half shadow, half rain. Ray? No, too still, too tall. Lightning flashed, and the dock was empty again. She locked the door and pulled Eli close, his small body shaking. It's okay. It's just the storm. But she knew it wasn't. The smell of the river was stronger now, metallic, like rust and rot. When the thunder quieted for a moment, she heard it again, that whispering knock beneath them. Tap, pause, tap, tap, like a code, like someone answering. She held Eli tighter, whispering against his hair. It's all right. I'm here. But her eyes stayed on the floor, on the small gap where the safe door still hung open. She thought of the ledger, of the line scrawled in wet ink. The river keeps what it's owed. Maybe that wasn't a warning, maybe it was a promise. By dawn the storm had passed. The river was still, calm as glass. Mara sat on the deck, exhausted, her arms wrapped around Eli, both of them staring at the horizon. The boat creaked softly under their weight. Behind her, the cabin smelled of mud and decay. The safe was closed again. She hadn't done it. She didn't need to. Some debts had a way of collecting themselves. Across the water, Ray stood on the dock, watching. He didn't call out, didn't wave, just stood there, as the river mist rose between them like smoke. Mara looked down at the reflection in the water. Her face, Eli's, and behind them, faintly, another shape, a man's outline, blurred, standing where the safe was. She blinked, and it was gone. The morning sun broke through, soft and golden. The kind of light that makes even ruin look forgiving. Eli leaned against her shoulder. "Mom, are we still going to stay here?" She looked at the river. "The steady, endless water, for now," she said, "until the river decides otherwise." The wind shifted, carrying a faint sound through the reeds. A slow, hollow knock against the hull, tap, tap, and then silence. The river looked clean again by morning, as if it hadn't swallowed a storm, a secret or a soul just hours before. Mara stood barefoot on the deck, her jeans still damp from the night. The sunlight came thin and white, pressing through the fog like a pale hand. Eli was inside, still sleeping. He'd cried himself quiet, and now his breath rose and fell against the faint hum of the boat's old generator. The Maribel didn't creak this morning. It listened. Mara felt the silence like a pressure in her ears. Her eyes traced the curve of the shoreline where the docks met the mud bank. Ray's truck was gone. Only tire marks remained in the wet earth. She thought about calling someone, the sheriff maybe, tell them there was a body, that she'd found old money buried under a boat floor. But what would she say when they asked why she'd broken open the safe, why she hadn't come sooner? Because she'd been thinking of her son. Because for one trembling heartbeat, she'd believed that the dead man's silence could buy Eli a home, and wasn't that the sin of all the others before her? The knock on the hull came just before noon. 3 slow thuds. Then quiet. Mara froze mid-step. It wasn't the rhythm of the river this time. It was deliberate. She opened the door. Ray stood on the dock, hatless, eyes bloodshot from sleeplessness. In his hand, he held the ledger. "Mind if I come aboard?" Mara hesitated, then nodded. "Eli's inside," he nodded back. "Won't take long." When he stepped in, he didn't look around, didn't meet her eyes. He just set the ledger down on the table between them. "I told you not to open that thing." She crossed her arms. "You didn't say there was a body." Ray exhaled through his nose, jaw tight. "There wasn't supposed to be." "Who was he?" He looked out the window where the river light flickered through the glass. Name was John Harrow, Tilda's brother. He helped us move the money that night. We argued. He wanted to take it all upriver. Said we shouldn't hide it here. I hit him. Not hard. He fell, cracked his head. We panicked. Tilda said the river would take care of him. Guess she was right. Mara's throat felt dry. She knew. She's known every day since, he said quietly. The ledger was her way of keeping us bound to it. Every debt marked down, every lie written like penance. Mara's hands trembled. "And now you think it's my problem." Ray finally met her eyes. "It already is. You woke it up." She wanted to laugh, but the sound stuck in her chest. "You think the river's got a memory? That it's coming for you?" He leaned closer, voice low, steady. "I don't think. I know, it don't forget. I've seen what happens when you try to cheat it. The money don't stay, the peace don't last, and the water always finds a way back." She stared at him. "You sound like Tilda." She ain't wrong. Outside, a breeze picked up, rustling the reeds. The sound was soft, but insistent. A hiss that made the air feel smaller. Ray glanced toward the hatch. "You close it back up?" She nodded. "I did." "Good," he said. Then, after a pause, "You should leave this place, Mara. Tonight. Before dark. Leave it. I paid for it. You paid for the roof," he said, his voice thinning. "You didn't pay for what's underneath." Eli appeared at the doorway then, rubbing his eyes. "Mr. Ray?" Ray smiled faintly. "Hey, kiddo." Eli looked at the ledger on the table. "Is that from the boat?" Mara stepped forward. "Eli, go get your things. We might take a drive." "Now?" "Now." He frowned but obeyed, retreating toward the back room. Ray watched him go. "He doesn't know, does he?" "He doesn't need to. He will. The river likes the innocent. It listens to them more." Mara's patience snapped. "Stop talking like that. It's not alive, Ray. It's just water." "It's just—" She trailed off. Ray waited. "Just what?" "Just what's left," she said quietly. "After everything else drowns." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The wind shifted again, carrying the smell of rain that hadn't yet fallen. Then Ray reached into his coat and pulled something out. An old brass key. "The safe," he said. "That was the original key. The combination didn't work because Tilda jammed it before she sold the boat. I kept this all these years." He placed it on the table. The metal was worn smooth from age. "You came here to give me that?" "I came here to end it." Mara eyed him warily. "What do you mean?" He turned toward the hatch. "The river don't like thieves, Mara, but it forgives the ones who make things right." He crouched down, pulling at the boards. The smell of rust and decay wafted up as the hatch opened again. The darkness yawned below. "Ray," he looked up at her, eyes steady, voice calm. "Go wait with your boy." She shook her head. "No, tell me what you're doing. Returning what don't belong to us." He lowered himself through the hatch, the light of the lantern flickering on the damp walls below. She heard him grunt as he moved something heavy, the sound of metal scraping wood, a splash of water, then silence. Ray? No answer. Ray! Mara dropped to her knees, leaning over the opening. The lantern was still there, its light bobbing faintly, but Ray wasn't. Only the sound of the river sloshing beneath the boat. Her pulse raced. Ray, get back up here. Nothing. She grabbed the lantern and lowered it further. The beam cut across the open safe. The bundles of bills were gone. The mud stirred below, rippling as if something large had just moved through it. Then she saw it. Ray's hat, floating slowly upward, turning once before sinking again. A sharp cry tore from her throat. She slammed the hatch shut and stumbled backward, shaking. Eli appeared in the doorway, clutching his backpack. Mom, what happened? She couldn't speak. Her mouth opened, but no words came. She pulled him into her arms, trembling. He looked up at her. Are we leaving? Yes, she said hoarsely. Now. They drove until the road turned to gravel, and the river disappeared behind the trees. The van rattled with every mile, but Mara didn't stop. Eli slept again, his head resting against her arm. The afternoon light slipped through the windshield in long, pale streaks. At the edge of town, she pulled over by a gas station and stared at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Eyes hollow, hair wild, face older than she remembered. She reached into her jacket pocket. The brass key lay there, cold and slick with river water. She hadn't taken it. It had been left for her, for a long time. She sat there, listening to the faint hum of the highway, to Eli's quiet breathing. Then softly, she whispered, maybe to herself, maybe to the river that lived somewhere inside her now, I'm not coming back. But the key in her palm felt heavier with every word. When she looked down, water glistened along the ridges of the metal, beating in perfect circles, like it was still dripping from the river itself. She closed her hand tight, but the moisture didn't fade. As they drove away, the sound of the van's tires faded under the hum of the river beyond the trees. Slow, deep, endless, and somewhere, far behind them, the Maribel rocked gently in the current. Her ropes loosened, her reflection rippling faintly in the afternoon light. On her deck, the hatch stood open again. Inside the dark water beneath, something moved, not in anger, but in patience, waiting for the next name to be written in the ledger of the river. 2 weeks later, the river was a rumor behind her. Mara rented a small room above a laundromat on the edge of town, 4 walls that smelled of detergent and rust, a window that looked out over power lines instead of water. The silence was strange here. It didn't lap or sigh. It just sat. Eli adjusted faster than she did. He started school again, made a friend who liked to trade baseball cards, and stopped asking about the boat. He still drew it, though, small sketches in the margins of his notebooks. The Maribel, always tilted slightly to one side, always floating on a gray, endless river. Sometimes, when Mara came to wake him, she'd find the pencil still in his hand, as if he'd fallen asleep mid-dream. At night, Mara dreamt of water, not the violent, storming kind, but calm, deceptively calm. She'd stand on the dock, barefoot, the fog curling around her knees. Somewhere in the mist, she'd hear knocking, slow, familiar. When she woke, her throat would taste of iron. She told herself it was memory. Nothing more, but some mornings she'd find her shoes by the door, damp soles, a faint trace of mud along the floor, and once when she opened the kitchen drawer, the brass key rolled forward and clinked against the counter, though she was certain she'd locked it away in the glove box. She stared at it for a long time before closing the drawer again. The radio said the river had flooded again. A short segment on the local news. Authorities are investigating the appearance of a half-submerged vessel found adrift near Highway 9. No identification yet, but witnesses describe a white-painted houseboat bearing the faded name Maribel. Mara shut off the radio before the rest of the report. She sat in silence, staring at the faint tremor of her own hands. She told herself it was coincidence. The river dragged up all kinds of things, but deep inside she knew better. The Maribel didn't drift. She waited. That evening, Eli came to her with a drawing. It showed the river again, but this time there was a figure standing on the deck. Not Mara, not him. Just a shadow, one arm raised as if waving. Who's that? She asked softly. Eli tilted his head. I don't know, he just wanted to be there. Mara smiled faintly, though her chest tightened. It's a good drawing, honey. Really good, he grinned, proud. Can we go see the river again sometime? Her heart caught. Why? He shrugged. Sometimes I dream it's calling. She brushed a hand through his hair. Dreams aren't real, sweetheart. He looked up at her, eyes calm and sure. Then why do they sound the same as the knocking? That night, as rain began to fall again, Mara lay awake, listening to it tap against the window. Steady, rhythmic, almost too even. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap. Her breath caught. She turned toward the window, but there was nothing, only darkness and the faint shimmer of wet glass. Still, she whispered into the quiet, barely moving her lips. I gave it back. Outside, The wind shifted, carrying the scent of water, not rainwater, but river water, cold, muddy, familiar. It slipped through the crack in the window frame, curling through the room like breath. Mara closed her eyes, holding Eli close as thunder rumbled far away, and in that moment, half dream, half waking, she thought she heard it, a soft, distant voice rising with the rain, not angry, not vengeful, just a whisper carried by the river itself, calm and certain. The river remembers.